Hey friends, my name is Ammunizers. You can also call me Marcus. Today we'll be doing a project walkthrough on my latest single, the game Green Mix. The original game song was actually released last year December, which is an electronic song, and I've wanted to create a remix of it because this song has a special place in my heart. This time, lo-fi hip-hop, and this track was inspired by Lakey Inspired, so shout out to him. And it's the first time I've created this kind of song. So without further ado, let's jump right into the project and I will take you through it. How this is going to work is that I'm going to start from the start of the song and I'll progress towards the end. Every 8 bars, I will play the song to let you guys take a listen and I'll explain whatever new comes in within that 8 bars and so forth and so on. Ammunizers, the game Green Mix, hip hop, written and produced by yours truly. This is how the entire song looks like. 26 tracks, but if you exclude the automation clips, it's about maybe 2019-ish, around there. It's okay. Pause the video and count and let me know in the comments. This is the mixer. I've categorized it and sorted out by colors just for you guys. Right here is the kick and the snare, followed by the cymbals, the piano, the backup pianos like the Rhodes, miscellaneous sounds, and the vocal. About 25 tracks in total. Alright, let's start from the beginning of the song. In a hip hop or lo-fi song, the most important element of it is the drums. So in this case, the three main elements are the kicks, the kick, snare, and the hi-hat. Starting with the kick, as you know, all the drums are samples. The kick is from a Kashmir sample pack, which I recently purchased about 2 months back, I think during the New Year or end of year sale. Pretty good discount. I bought the entire volume 1 to volume 3, so it was a bulk, and I fell in love with it because the ambient sounds, the effects, and the orchestral drums and instruments, they sounded so good, and like maybe I'll be using them in any of all my projects from now onwards. But of course, I was a bit lazy in this case. Snare, same thing. It's a Kashmir trap snare, a basic snare. Hi-hats, Kashmir too, and an open hi-hat, which is also from the same sample pack. Let's talk about the mixing. At this point, you notice that I have two kicks, but they are actually a duplicate. They're exactly the same, but they are in different volumes. As you can see, kick 2 is softer than kick 1. The reason for this is just to make it more realistic or more variance. So instead of the kick hitting all at the same volume, this kind of humanizes it, like what a drummer would do whenever he hits every 8/16 beat. The kicks don't sound all the same. So I've actually lowered the volume of this and I've just placed it in another mixer track. And these kicks are both routed to the kick bus. There's an EQ done. Kicks are usually focused on the low end. And because it's a lo-fi song, you don't need the highs at all. Because right here will be filled up by vocals and cymbals and all your pianos and Rhodes. Followed by the kick is the snare. Contrary to the kick, it doesn't need the low end. So as you can see, I put a simple low high pass here, removing all the low frequencies. I've got a mixing tip for you guys, especially for beginners. I noticed that every time in hip hop, there will be a time where the kick and the snare will hit together, especially this part. And what happens is that when these two hit, they will usually, the meter will actually go up a few decibels because the snare and the kick, when they hit together, they'll be amplified or maybe because they are in phase, that's why there's a huge bump in decibel. What I would do is that I would actually slap in a fruity limiter and put a ceiling on it. So in this case, so what happened, the kick and the snare is on the same volume. So if you were to see here, when the kick and the snare hits, you can see that from the input, there is actually a spike in extra decibels. This might be a problem during mastering when you want to actually push the track as close as 0 dB, but because it has this extra dB and peak, therefore the song cannot be as loud as it can be, and it all has to be fixed during the mixing. In this case, I put a ceiling, and as you can see, the output, whatever that goes beyond this green line, which is the threshold, gets chopped off, which is why I could retain the volume in the meter. The kick bus and the snare are both routed to the drum bus, so the drum bus consists of both the kick and the snare, and that is where I put the ceiling. Because without it, if you were to take a look at the drum bus, it goes up to nearly 0 dB. But with the ceiling on, it stays at negative 6 dB. So just a mixing tip for you guys, just to maintain or control your volume in the mixing meter. The thing is that don't overdo this. Sometimes it doesn't work in the sense that sometimes if you squash the sound like that by putting a ceiling, it might actually take away the oomph of the kick or the snare, but in this case it seems to work. Otherwise, don't put it as much. Don't put the ceiling too low. Put it a bit higher with a bit of peak of with a bit of decibels. It should be fine. But in this case, it was a bit too much. So that's for the kick. The hi-hats are the opposite side of the spectrum. As you can see, I have a few hi-hats with different volumes, even open hi-hats. They're all routed to the hi-hat bus. And from there, I put it into the cymbals bus, which has only one EQ to save CPU. This is pretty much the work. I've just cut off the low mids onwards and just keep the highs, because this is where the hi-hats and the cymbals would breathe in terms of the frequency spectrum. So that's pretty much it for the drums. It's pretty much the same entirely. Moving on, the sub bass is a basic sine wave, and it's a stock preset from the Serum synthesizer, and I've actually tweaked it a bit, changed the attack and the release just a bit, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Not much has been done. For EQ, I've slapped in a Camel Crusher just to give it more of a saturation or a gritty kind of feel, but not too much. So I've actually placed it about 12%. Fat filter, cut off the really low, the deep lows, the low lows, and the highs, because I don't want all of the saturation to be shining until the high end. And fruity balance. I have a lot of fruity balances around all my tracks, because this is purely just to use to automate the volume of the sound of the track. And another EQ for sidechain. Mixing tip number 2 is to create space for both your kick and your sub bass. In this case, because both of them are in the same frequency spectrum, in this case in the lows, what I did was I placed the Fruity Peak controller, and I've actually placed this what do you call it, high pass effect. I linked this slider to the peak controller. What happens is that whenever the kick hits, this slider goes down. I'll show it to you. What it does is that because the sub bass is kind of like a pad which goes on the entire note, when the kick hits, you also have your sub frequencies, and you don't want them to fight and it starts becoming muddy. So when the kick hits, the fader ducks down, and once the kick is done playing, and it slides back up. So it's just to create room for each other. and that is a very useful tip which took me quite a while to even learn, because all this while I've never been bothered doing sidechain. I learned sidechain quite late, and sidechain is really important to create space in your mix. Next is the piano. Now, I was fortunate to get this plugin for free because 2 years ago I bought the Focusrite Scarlett Solo, the third generation audio interface. And when I signed into their website to register my product, I noticed that they were giving some software for free. And I was fortunate enough to actually redeem this addictive keys, and I've chose this particular um, Studio Grand. And ever since then, I fell in love with it. It sounds really good, and yeah, it's been all of my songs that involve piano. Looking at the mix, I've actually divided into two actually. This is the dry signal of the piano. This is the wet signal of the piano, meaning to say I created a track, just a channel just for the reverb, and I've combined them all into one bus. For the dry signal, I've placed a fruity limiter. This is more for to boost the volume, because the addictive keys was a bit soft. Because in this case, I like to mix my songs a bit loud. EQ, cut off a bit of the lows, just a very uh, a simple slope, and a bit of the highs, because this is a lo-fi song. The lo-fi is doesn't have much highs, and a bit of surgical EQing. And I've routed the wax signal to the reverb channel. So as you can see over here, the dry is completely down, the wet is completely up with 3 seconds of decay. And I've also done EQing on the reverb signal only. So same thing, the lows are cut off, a bit of surgical EQing on the reverb signal. Pretty balanced to automate and manipulate the amount of reverb throughout the song. And they all come together with the bus with one effect which is a preset called radio, and it's only used once in the song, which is the very start of the song, and after that no more. So let's take a listen. It's right here if you notice it. Yeah, so it creates that radio effect which only lasts for just one bar. Fruity limiter, a bit of compression, because obviously pianos have high peaks when the key hits, and balance to automate the piano entirely with the reverb. The piano is actually complemented with the piano pad, which is taken from FL Studio's native plugin called Flex. So this is the preset Essential Piano's piano pad. I wanted to create that wow wow effect. So there's an automation here, which is it automates the cutoff. EQs are pretty much similar to the piano because it's very close to the piano. The lows are cut off, the highs are cut off. Fruity limiter again, just to boost its volume and a bit of compression, and as usual, manipulation of the volume, which takes place over here, this bar, because it fades in. That's pretty much it for the first 8 bars, and that is the intro of the song. Now we move to the break. Right. What's new is Miscellaneous and Cymbals. Just play it. Accompanied by it is the crash. It's a regular Kashmir crash number 1. So I didn't even bother searching. I just picked the first one, and turns out to work fine. And the third one is a cymbal transition, which is obviously a transition. Also by Kashmir. And that's pretty much it. I've only used three cymbals for the entire song. What is new on the break is that I've introduced the Rhodes, which sounds like this. Initially, it was 8 bars of this chord, and I decided to actually put this high notes because it creates a variation to the song. Because initially it would sound really boring if it's 8 bars of the same thing, so I just placed this and I really like it. As usual, they're much close to the piano, so equalization is actually not that different. Same thing, I cut off the lows, and I've done a bit of surgical EQing with a bit of compression on that specific frequency, which is going beyond the threshold which I've set. So it's EQing by making compressions on that particular frequency area. Another thing fades in, which is the chimes. Let me just play it. It sounds really weird on its own, but as you know, it's quite a common thing in lo-fi music where there's a pitch bend happening, but it sounds really good as a whole. Of course, not on its own. It sounds a bit creepy. What I used was the Soft Chimes, which is a native FL Studio plugin at Fruity DX10 FM Synth, and I chose the preset Soft Chimes, which doesn't sound like this. I've actually tweaked it a lot to sound like this. Well, actually, originally it sounded more like flat, but in this case, I just made it like just gave it a bit of a character. And this is the kind of like the main melody of the drop, so it's fading in because this is the break and build up. There's reverb with 3 seconds of decay, followed by compression, just a bit of compression, and equalization with surgical EQ because this area is really harsh. So I just cut off some frequencies, and yeah, it turned out great after that. And a fruity balance, as you saw the automation clip, because it fades in. Now we are moving to the drop of the song, and I'll be playing this for 16 bars instead of 8. So let's go. That's the drop. Pretty cool. I love it so much. The second half of the drop, something else comes in, which I call it melody. Sounds like this. Again, another flex preset, Arkansas Cityscape with capacitation. It's actually a backup melody. So it complements the pianos too, but it's behind the chimes. If I were to play it in the song, you can tell it's not very loud, but it's there, so it does its part just to fill up the song a little bit more because it's the second half of the drop. The mixing for this melody is 1.5 seconds of decay with 100% wet and reduced dry, because I want to create that echo distant kind of feeling. And of course, the same kind of equalization. A fruity balance, again, all the time. Now we'll be moving to the second break and build up. Vocals come in right here. Let's take a listen.
You know, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we must obey the rules of the game. We can pick the game, but we cannot change the rules. See you later.
Now let's talk about the vocals. This is how it sounds like when it's completely dry.
You know, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we must obey the rules of the game. We can pick the game, but we cannot change the rules. See you later. See you later.
That's the original vocals. And this is the processing chain. First, I placed an auto-tune kind of effect, which is by FL Studio. Picture is native.
You know, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we must obey. It's that we must rules of the game. We can pick the game, but we cannot change the rules.
So it gives that kind of chipmunk helium balloon effect. Followed by that is an effector, a lo-fi. Just because it's lo-fi, I chose lo-fi. But it gives that 8-bit kind of feeling. So let's take a listen one more time.
You know, if there's one thing I've learned,
That's with it, this without it.
you know, if there's one thing I've learned,
With it.
you know, if there's one thing I've learned.
Right after that is compression, because obviously vocals has a lot of high dynamic range in their waveforms. EQ, same thing, cut off the lows and a bit of the highs because of the 8-bit effect, which is really like harsh on the high frequencies. And delay, because I want to create, it's just characterization. So with the delay, let's take a listen.
But they cannot change the rules. They cannot change the rules. They cannot change the rules. They cannot change the rules.
So that's what delay does. It actually creates a copy of the original sound in a certain rate and time which you can manipulate. And followed by reverb.
If there's one thing I've learned,
That's all for the vocals. Now, fun fact, I sampled the vocals from a game, and if you could guess the game, please tell me and write it down in the comment section below. Moving on to the second build-up. The only thing that's different here was that I changed it to a staccato kind of effect. The second drop comes. Let's take a listen. I really love that pause effect just right before the drop. Oh, that's so good. Like, it stops and the piano comes, then the kick comes. Dang. Just nice, so good. I won't be playing this again because the second drop is the same as the first drop. And for the finale, I decided to switch gears on the drum, which sounds like this. there are three things here that I've considered putting in on the outro of the song. The first thing is that I've switched the rhythm or the beat of the drums, so it doesn't sound like your average lo-fi hip hop, but it sounds more of like the rap hip hop type of drums, like this. And the second thing was to introduce a mombaton style at the end, the last bar, just to give it a final oomph for the listeners before the song ends. And lastly is a recorded piano which I played. I recorded it with a sustain and I reversed it in Edison to give that sucking effect. That's how the song ends. Alright, that's pretty much it for the whole project walkthrough. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to listen to this song uninterrupted, you can stream it through Spotify or my YouTube channel. So yeah, do whatever you want with the video. Like, comment, dislike, share it with everyone, and I'll see you soon. So, ciao!